true. Nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object, there was none. Passion, there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so, by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now, this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded. With what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. I turned the latch of his door and opened it. Every night at about midnight, I opened it oh so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in the lantern, closed so that no light shone out, and I thrust in my head. You would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I had moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously, oh so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night, just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work. For it was not the old man who vexed me, but it was his evil eye. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone and inquiring how he had passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him as he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. a watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think, there I was opening the door, little by little, and he did not even dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea. And perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly as if startled. Now you may think I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch with thick darkness, for those shutters were closed fastened through fear of robbers. And so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily, steadily. I had my head in and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed, listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches on the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was a groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh, no. It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew that sound so well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise when he had turned in his bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but he could not. He had been saying to himself, "It's nothing but a wind in the chimney. It's only a mouse crossing the floor, or it's merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain. All in vain because death, in approaching him, had stalked him with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. It was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he never saw nor heard, the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a very long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a little, very, very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a single dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot out from the crevice full upon the vulture eye. It was wide open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow of my bones. but I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct precisely upon that damned spot. And have I not told you that what you mistake for badness is but over-acuteness of the sense? Now, I say there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart, and it increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulates a soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eve. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, louder and louder. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder at every moment. Do you mark me well that I have told you how nervous I am? And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst, and new anxiety seized me. The sound which would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come, and with a loud yell, I threw the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once and once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled down the heavy bed over him. I smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat with a muffled sound. This did not vex me, for I knew it would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there for many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you still think me mad, you'll think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head, the arms, and the legs. I took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited it all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I'd been too wary for that. A tub had caught all. But when I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. And as the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for now what had I to fear? There entered 3 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and the officers had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I had to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search, and search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed, and in the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them to rest here from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat while I answered cheerily. They chatted of familiar things, but ere long, I found myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But still, they chatted, and the ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definiteness until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice. Yet, the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I grasped for breath, and the officers heard it not. I talked quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose the guard and argued about trifles in a high key with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Would they not be gone? I paced the floor, to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men. But the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards. But the noise arose all over and continually increased. It grew louder, louder, and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God! No. They heard. They suspected. They knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think, but anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear these hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now, again, hark! Louder! 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 Villains! I shrieked. Dissemble no more! I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here! It is the beating of this hideous heart! Breathe in deep. Digest it, inhale it, do whatever you need to do, but think about how the story hit you. Let's not even worry about trying to figure out what Edgar Allan Poe was thinking in the context that he was going through way back in 1843. I think that's too far removed for us to get anything meaningful from that. I want you to focus on how the story bounced off of you. And I'll share a thought. This kind of came from a conversation. We do these live in our Twitch community as well. I'll drop the link to that down below. But in that conversation, there was a conversation about an unreliable narrator, a person who's telling you the story or guiding you through the process, but their motives and questions and sanity and innocence are all completely in doubt. So the person that brought it up about unreliable narrators mentioned that Poe was one of their early introductions into the unreliable narrator perspective. But I actually think that our first introduction with an unreliable narrator is ourselves, just as we start thinking. And the way that it hit in this story was this nameless, blameless madman was so focused on justifying this act that was based on something so superficial as the appearance of this old man's eye, who may have been suffering from a medical condition that caused that, something completely out of their control and completely non-indicative of anything to do with their character, but it was so evil that it drove this person into violence. I hear it, and I've done it, and I know people that have done it. Sometimes there are things about people that we might not like, and then that carries over into thinking about everything else that they do. We are overly fixated on people's appearances, and once we get it in our head that we have a problem with somebody, that they're dishonest, they're untrustworthy, whether or not it has anything to do with mannerisms, whether they look us in the eye or how they hold themselves, their tone of voice, all these irrelevant considerations cause us to justify how cruel we might be to other people. Not so cruel as to murder them and dismember them and drain their blood and hide their bodies under the floor, but still so cruel as to justify the kinds of jokes that we make about people and their appearances, the way that we treat them, kind of the unknown reasons that we are cruel towards each other. That was one of the strongest parts that hit me about the narrative. Another interesting facet about the story, and someone else in our community brought this up too, was the rising tension and the rising madness of the narrator juxtaposed with the increasing amounts of fear in the victim. I thought that was a really interesting point too. But I would love to hear your thoughts and how the story hit you. I wanted to share my perspective and how this isn't just some isolated story from the 1800s, but really when we think about how and why we might be cruel or even make jokes or do anything that's harmful to other people, what do we really get at when we think about why we're doing it? Is it as insane and ridiculous as the evilness of someone's vulture eye in this particular scenario? I think very often the answer is yes. If you like this story and the performance and you'd like to hear more, there's a couple of ways that you can invite that to yourself and help out Musique Macabre at the same time. You can, of course, subscribe and join the community that way. You can also find us on Twitch, where I will leave our Twitch link down below, and you can hang with us there. But thank you, and until next time, enjoy the music.